So in this lecture, we're going to be talking about wound healing, and this is part of the integument or the skin lecture or the skin section. There are four stages of in wound healing, and we're talking about acute wound healing. Okay, you actually have hemostasis. Hemostasis means hemo, meaning blood; stasis meaning to stop. So the first purpose, the first most important thing when you actually are wounded is that the blood has to be plugged, okay? And that is actually, in this case, done by platelets, okay? And vascular spasm. So actually, when you cut yourself, folks, your blood vessels actually automatically, in this case, spasm, vasoconstrict, to prevent the exudation, or in this case, the release of more blood. And then the platelets then generate this platelet plug that actually then prevents more blood, in this case, escaping or all right, into the surface. So that's the first thing. The first thing then is to stop the bleeding, hemostasis. Then after, and so this happens like seconds to hours. So if this takes more like a couple of days, you're in trouble. Okay. And then the second part, folks, the second part is actually this thing called inflammatory phase. And this inflammatory phase is actually, in this case, done by primarily white blood cells. In this case, we're talking about macrophages and neutrophils. And so you have to understand now, this is dead tissue. This is actually dead, non-functional tissue, right? This blood is no longer functional. And obviously, that site is now, all of that stuff is basically just junk. So your macrophages and your neutrophils actually has to migrate from the bloodstream and actually start degrading all of this dead tissue through phagocytosis. So they eat it, okay? They degrade it, okay? And the other thing too is when you cut yourself, there's also a likelihood that you actually have bacteria or other microorganisms that might be harmful for you in this area. So that is why your macrophages and neutrophils actually neutrophils migrate first, and then macrophages actually are already there, but then they become much more dominant in the second part of the actual inflammatory phase. And the reason why it's called inflammatory phase, folks, is because it's mediated by white blood cells. Okay? Now, in stage 2, you can actually already see that there are fibroblasts here. Recall that fibroblasts makes two types of fibers, okay? Collagen fibers and elastic fibers. And recall also that in the dermis, the dominant tissue type is connective tissue, and obviously connective tissue is predominantly, in this case, dense irregular connective tissue is primarily collagen fibers. Okay, so that happens next, and then what happens is you have a proliferative phase, and the proliferative phase is, as you can see, you only had a few fibroblasts before, and now you have multiple fibroblasts. And the reason why they're doing this again is they're laying new connective tissue as your macrophages, and in this case, starts degrading, or in this case, demolishing the non-functional tissue. So as the non-functional tissue is being degraded, that is being replaced by fibers, by fibroblasts. Okay, and then the last step is actually remodeling. So this takes weeks to months, and remodeling, folks, is mainly, in this case, epithelialization. So remember, there used to be a hole here in which there was no epithelium, and now what happens is the two margins of your epithelium that was missing before reapproximates themselves by growing across the actual wound site. All right, and then as this is going on, obviously the actual extracellular matrix is being like further remodeled in this case. So again, 4 stages. So the first thing is hemostasis, the inflammatory phase, right? The proliferative phase, in which you actually have a high population of fibroblasts, and then you actually have your remodeling phase, which takes the longest. So those are the stages of wound healing.